first day I went down there, she was running the Thursday morning breakfast at that time, and still is. And she welcomed me and got me started, and I immediately noticed she was wearing the Philadelphia Phillies t-shirt.
Philadelphia? I went to Temple. Oh, did you? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, she's went to school at St. Joe's.
Yay!
And it's hard to find fellow Phillies fans around here. That kept me going back, amongst other things. And as I mentioned at the 10 o'clock service, she is, I gotta get out my cheat sheet again. She is a research source and referral specialist at the Samaritan Center, which means she, and correct me if I'm wrong, she helps connect people with resources that they need to deal with their daily issues, and that includes finding places to live, finding work, finding assistance through a lot of the programs that John Yinger told us about a couple weeks ago, and kind of negotiate that confusing maze. And she actually helped out a person that my wife and I knew who worked at Tops several years ago. It was very helpful for her. So, got a little bit of personal experience. So, with that, Julie, take off.
Thank you. And it was wonderful also to see a fellow Phillies fan. It was some dark Yankee days. They won the World Series, so. Sorry. So when Peter and I started talking about this event, he said that you guys were really interested in learning a little bit more about poverty. And I went on the website and I kind of took a look and saw that you had some really smart people coming here before me. So I was like, uh-oh. So I'm going to kind of briefly go through some things that I would imagine they have kind of discussed. And just correct me if I'm wrong, or feel free to interrupt me at any point. But I figured we'd start a little bit about the Samaritan Center. I know we have an expert right here in the audience, so you're going to have to correct me on these first few slides, okay? So I wanted to first share our mission. Samaritan Center is an interfaith effort of community members that are committed to serving the hungry and those in need in Central New York in order to promote their dignity, welfare, and self-sufficiency. And I think that there's a lot in there, which is really, really a good thing. But we're talking about who we are and how we formed, which we'll get to in a few slides. But the 7 downtown churches got together. There were different faiths that came together to serve the hungry, to respond very concretely to a need. And then we serve the hungry, but we don't really say we just feed the hungry. Serving the hungry is a much more diverse way to look at that. And we were here to promote their dignity, their welfare, and their self-sufficiency. Just a little bit of background. When I first came to Syracuse, I'm from Philadelphia, I joined the Jesuit Volunteer Corps, which is kind of like an AmeriCorps. And I know there was a talk of an Episcopalian volunteer corps very similar.
There is Episcopal Service Corps and Young Adult Service Corps. Yeah. Young Adult Service Corps is international, and Episcopal Service Corps is domestic.
Okay. So we were a domestic, a version of that based on the Jesuit values, kind of similar to Lemoyne. And I went to a Jesuit college also, St. Joseph's, in Philadelphia. So I joined this volunteer corps, and I was pretty bummed when I heard I was going to be working in the soup kitchen, I must admit. I was like, oh, so I'm going to be a Band-Aid to all these crazy social problems that I've spent my college like learning about and getting excited about. And I couldn't have been more wrong. But because it's here in our mission, that every person that walks in our door is treated with the utmost dignity, that we care about their welfare, their general welfare, not just that they come to us hungry, but that they come to us as really diverse people in need. And that our goal is to promote their self-sufficiency, which you might not consider when you give somebody a meal that you're able to promote their self-sufficiency, but and we'll get to this too, but there are so many folks in our community that have to make difficult choices every day. Do I pay my rent or do I buy groceries? We promote their self-sufficiency by saying that this hot and nutritious and healthy meal will always be here for you without any questions. So you're free to make other choices in your life for past medical bills, for the rent, for keeping the heat on in your apartment. And we promote people's self-sufficiency by making our space a space for community connections, for them to learn more about options in the community, in order to proceed on their pathways, their individual pathways, in a way that provides them support for their journey. So that's kind of, just briefly, that wasn't brief at all, but that was our mission. So this is where I'm going to need some help. In 1981, 7 downtown churches founded the Samaritan Center. At the time, actually, there had been, and it kind of still exists today, a place called Unity Kitchen that is part of the Catholic social worker, and they were providing both shelter and meals for folks in need. They changed their service model in 1981 from serving large groups of people that came in hungry to limiting their service. They actually wanted to do a Last Supper model. So they would invite 24, it was double the amount of disciples, 24 individuals in twice a week. They would do a foot washing and a full meal, and they call it lavish hospitality, which was awesome. I mean, it's a great model of service, but these downtown churches literally saw people in the streets hungry, and they were responding to that. So they got together and formed the Samaritan Center and started at St. Paul's Episcopal Cathedral, serving sandwiches out the side door or the alley door?
Side door. Between the Y and the cathedral.
And that first day, if I'm correct, there was 34 folks served. Just to give you guys an idea, at our breakfast meal last Thursday, we did 178.
Oh my goodness.
And that's, our breakfast meal is traditionally a lighter meal than our dinner meal. So, that's quite an evolution. And it was my understanding that each church picked a day, and every Thursday or Friday or what have you would be Christ Church.
Marion has historical memory here.
So I am absolutely not the expert, but you're the expert in your midst. So.
Yeah, sure.
So that was 1981. We began serving hot meals and moving down to do meal service in the basement in the late 80s, early 90s. Okay, I'm looking for confirmation on this one. They became an independent 501c3 organization in the mid-90s as well, which did a lot to help protect the churches, kind of formalize some of the things that they had been working towards. And they're also the Samaritan Center was kind of beginning some programmatic ideas out in the community, which eventually, because of a lot of reasons, but especially the economy, kind of had been retracted. But when things started to get better in 2007, they launched a breakfast program. The breakfast program, in 3-month increments, each picked a day, and they started. It was a continental breakfast program at the time, so to do cereal, toast, some kind of sweet or pastry, and then by 2009 we were doing a hot breakfast every Monday through Friday of the year. And it was, I think that's I came in 2008, so I kind of saw the beginnings of that, and it was something they were the planning was just excellent on. They kind of started by seeing the need. They were working with other community agencies that were also doing, there's another community agency at the time that was doing just a breakfast on Wednesdays. They never started on Wednesdays as to not overstep their bounds, to work and refer with other agencies. So I'm really proud of the way that they organized that. In 2009, they hired their full-time case manager, which is me. That's why it's a very important bullet point. Yeah. this was really, I think, I had been with him as a volunteer for the 2 years prior, but I think that this was a moment where we kind of said that we needed to devote someone full-time into helping our guests make community connections, because having just a yearly volunteer that was here that had to learn all the community agencies and how to navigate a system and then educate our guests on it was no longer efficient for the tapestry of services that we were seeing that our guests needed at the time. As we all, in our pocketbooks and our banks, remember 2008 and 2009 was a little bit of a dark time. We were serving an explosive number of folks. So that was when our yearly meals were starting to break 100,000, which is really incredible for a community our size.
Is that trended down since 2008 or not?
We're 115,000 last year. There's a little bit, we used to do a seconds for our meals for a number of years. And then we kind of stopped that because there were some concerns about food waste. You know, when someone's hungry, their indication is to go, if seconds are offered, to go get it, even if maybe they're not necessarily needed. So our technical meal numbers look like they kind of stagnated, but it's more individuals served. Because we're not offering a second meal. So now, from the data from 2 years ago on, we're starting to map meals now, or meals equal person served.
But adjusting for that, did you see a continued increase or decrease?
We're still considered, yeah. We're still seeing an incline that's not quite as sharp, but we're still seeing an incline in our meals. 115,000 was our numbers from last year. A little bit over that. I can't remember all that.
Excuse me, Julie, how much did the move, which was almost exactly a year ago now?
Yeah. The move it's been interesting, and if the data's still so new, it's a little bit difficult to tell. But just like some concrete data I can give you is August of 2014 to August of 2015. The move happened in April of 2015, so about halfway through. Our numbers of meals of child meals under 17, it doubled, tripled. Sorry, I either doubled or tripled now. I'm like, but we're noticing a lot of different trends. I think that something that we've really noticed, and this is much more anecdotal, and I have much more hard data to give you in a little bit, but I think that our meals in the beginning of the month are about the same, and when you guys talked about government benefits and stuff, a lot of that stuff's given out in the beginning of the month, so people will get their food stamp benefits on like the 3rd or the 5th. In the beginning of the month, our numbers will be down. I think that post the 15th of the month, that number is bigger than at the old space, because I think we're in a neighborhood of higher poverty. So these folks do have some resources set up. They might have an apartment. They might have food stamp benefits more. They might have other resources that they're able to utilize in the beginning of the month, but at the end of the month, those resources are running thin. So I think that while we've always noticed a beginning to the end of the month trend, I find it much more dramatic in our current space.
Well, and your new space is much more family friendly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're definitely noticing a lot more children, a lot more families. It's wheelchair and stroller accessible, and there is a dedicated space in the facility for families to sit and eat. Before, families would kind of, like everyone else, have to find a seat. We have 8 top tables, so 8-seated tables, specifically for families, and right across, and that's kind of an underneath storage where you can either push in your stroller or you can grab out the high chairs and the booster seats, and it's right next to a children's library and resource area specifically geared towards parents and families. I know we'll have a little more data on that. So how we do it. I think that there are a couple of really important things to say about how we do it. The first is that there is no questions asked, which is kind of the opposite of most social service models. When you look at, and I wish I had brought one with me, like we call the green form to get food stamp benefits and stuff, it's like thick and a lot of little lines, a lot of little, T's to cross and I's to dot. But we don't ask any questions up front. It's on us to start by saying hello. start by learning someone's name. Start to build that relationship between us so they can kind of open up and start to trust us. And that's when they will come and say, hey, you know, I've been looking for work for a really long time. Or, hey, I've never made a resume before. How do I do that? Hey, I've been living in a shelter for the last 2 months. How do I go about getting a new apartment? So that relationship model is a little bit backwards, but I think really speaks to the heart of who we are as an agency. People know your name. People know your story, and that there's a genuine connection between people. There are 7 full-time staff members. We also still have a Jesuit volunteer position, and we have another part-time volunteer position that's an Ignatian volunteer that is for retired individuals that come back and they do Jesuit spirituality, and she works with us two days a week, and then has a communion group with all the other Ignatian volunteers. And we also have a part-time kitchen person on the weekends. So that's 10 altogether, which is a huge growth. When I started, we had 6 people, so including the volunteer. But we're still a pretty small staff for any kind of social service agency that operates every day of the year. We have to utilize over 800 volunteers a month to do that, which is an incredible feat. And this year we actually hired our Jesuit volunteer from the last year to become our full-time volunteer coordinator, because we're starting to need about 22 to 25 volunteers every meal, which is significantly more than, it was 13 for a breakfast when I was the volunteer coordinator back in 2008, and only like 16 to 18 for dinner was the top that we could really fit behind that closed space that was our serving line. I buried the lead. Last year we served 115,000 meals. And here in our new space, we have expanded programming, including a basic needs closet. That is essentially a food pantry that is for basic care items. So, and again, we'll have to get into this in a little bit too. I'm not sure if I organize this the correct way now. But when you get benefits like food stamp benefits, if you're a single person, you probably get about $189 a month in food stamp benefits. But you are not permitted to buy toilet paper with that, dish soap, deodorant, toothpaste. You are not permitted to buy anything but food and drink products. And there's even some other kind of logistics behind that. Like, you're not supposed to be able to use those at restaurants. That's different throughout the country, to my understanding, because I know in California they allow the homeless individuals to buy fast food with their food stamp benefits, but here in New York State, at least in Onondaga County, we don't allow that. So even prepared food items like this is like my big Wegmans trick. If you go to like Wegmans, you get like blue cheese at the salad bar. It's actually cheaper to buy crumbly blue cheese and just dump it into one of the soup bowls and buy it by the pound and in the thing, but in the container. But you couldn't do that because you couldn't use your food stamp benefits on a prepared food. Does that make sense? So we operate a basic needs closet that has been kind of in existence even in our old space. We used to have a hospital cart that we would bring out and kind of really terrible wheel in a drawer that fell all the time, and we would offer people soap and shampoo from there. Now we have a small closet near the exit of St. John the Evangelist that folks can come, and it's a client choice-based model, so they can choose up to 5 items, like they're shopping in a store. I'd like a soap. I'd like a deodorant. I'd like a tube of toothpaste. We also have a computer lab that operates 1 day a week, where we have individuals come and we work on computer skills with them. We do it right now by an appointment. We have people that schedule, that we help them build resumes, we help them apply for jobs online. I don't know if anybody's filled out an online job application recently, but just to give you an idea, there's a pet store on Erie Boulevard in Syracuse. Their application took me an hour and a half with an individual to fill out. It was really difficult. So much the little graphics of people were popping up, and they were your fake customers. You had to choose what you would say to. I mean, and this is for a job that's going to pay you $9 an hour. So that's kind of difficult. And one of the things I'm proudest of that we've done for many, many years is we host in our space. We invite other agencies to come out and talk about their services at the Samaritan Center. We did this at our old space as well. But so people like AIDS Community Resources, like Easter Seals, like Soldier On, National Grid sends a consumer advocate out to help people get a workout and negotiation with their power bill. We have the Women's Opportunity Center, which helps, I'm trying to think of the way that they say this, but people that were homemakers and are now displaced in some manner, be it divorce, be it family emergency that they need to enter the workforce and they're not quite prepared. An opportunity to do a ton of skills training and computer training. We have the Volunteer Lawyer Project that comes out, and for 15 minutes our guests have an opportunity to meet with a lawyer. They sign a little contract, and for a few moments you have your own legal advice, and they can send you in the right direction for things like applying for disability benefits, things like child support that you're not sure how to get. I have a woman right now who had been hit by a car a number of years ago, and her lawyer was supposed to manage health insurance from New York State as a part of the settlement from this. And her lawyer was disbarred. She has no idea what to do next. So she hasn't had health insurance in 5 years since he was disbarred. So the complex ways that you can get to poverty, there's an expert out there in the community. And if we welcome them into the Samaritan Center and give them space, and we don't have to say, Joe, yeah, you go down to the DSS building, take the elevator up to the 8th floor and figure it out. What we say is, they're going to be here tomorrow. And this is a space where you already feel comfortable. You already feel at home. This is our community kitchen table. You feel ownership over this space. And the crazy social service agency can come to you. Which I think it helps people make that first step while they're already feeling more comfortable. So, this is where, please forgive me if any of your other wonderful experts have kind of talked about this, but I did want to kind of talk a little bit about some of the neighborhoods in need. And I have little notes. I certainly don't have any of this memorized. So I went on citydata.com and pulled some of these information, and you might have seen these in some of the big news stories, but I wanted to kind of just show you like a little snapshot, just so we can get our bearings, because I really like maps. Peter and I were actually just talking about this. This is Montgomery and Fayette right here. Right? I'm right? I'm right. I'm right. Okay. Always have to double check and make sure you're right. This actually, I think it's Montgomery and Fayette, right here. So this was our old space. And then right here is North State Street, and this is James. So we're right here, like in the corner of Willow. And then other maps that highlight those, we'll get a little better. So in our old neighborhood, the highlighted in red in 13202, the population is 1,346 residents, and they are comprised of 845 households, which means 92% of them are single people. It's 39% white, 26.8% black. The average household income is $45,000, which seems pretty good. The average house or condo value is $225,000. Costs $919 on average to rent down there. But the unemployment rate is 6.92%, and 46.3% of the folks in this neighborhood fall below the poverty line, which is crazy. That's like a really big number considering that median household income is $45,000. So there is a lot of wealth disparity right here.
So, excuse me, what is the poverty line now? What is
the actual, it depends on the household size.
kind of on average?
It is, I think it's, and it's so hard because I frame everything in months because that's how a lot of my guests. I will have to look that up real quick for you. the actual.
John Yanger say that last time? Was it?
18 or 20 for a single person, you think, somewhere in that range?
18.
No, it's for a family of 4.
It was about
Family of 4
19.
was about 18,000
Yeah.
or something.
Wow.
And that's for the year. Yeah.
A year.
I could be wrong, but that, doesn't that sound about
I
what
think
you
that's
said?
about right, like upper 18 or
It's
19.
like 20,000.
Yeah. That
Seemed like a
seems.
shock.
Pretty close, yeah.
Yeah.
That seems.
And it hasn't changed for how many years?
Yeah, long
Yeah.
time.
2004.
So 46.3% are below that, so it's pretty significant. And a big factor of some of this data, is my opinion probably, is that the YMCA is down there and they do senior and low income housing right next to us. So that's probably why, because you're also going to see it's 70.4% male. They have a male's residence down there. So that probably is something that really is a factor. That's some of the only low-income housing that I am aware of in this particular area. Now, other places in 13202 would also include the Catholic Charities Men's Shelter, which is down by what's the place that does all the laundry? Coin Textile. So that's kind of where they are, but that wouldn't be included in this particular swath because this swath kind of really split up zip codes. And then the median age is 30.9, which is super young, but that's probably again from the downtown residents. Just since I've been working there since 2008, I think like 6 apartment buildings within a couple blocks opened up that I know I couldn't afford, so I'm sure a lot of our guests could. But on Salina and Fayette, on Warren and Fayette, we were also next door between us and the YMCA was the Masonic Temple, which was converted to apartments prior to me coming to Syracuse. I know that rent for there I think is $1,200 a month.
So is gentrification displacing a lot of the people who had lived in this zip code?
In my experience, there wasn't a lot of people in poverty that lived like right there with us. At the time, a lot of it was vacant. So it's hard to say that we're pushing out, but we certainly aren't making new apartments for folks that are in need. And again, because I'm not a Syracuse native, when people say things like, "Oh well, we used to live in the whatever building," like I'm just like, "Oh, I don't know what that is." I know Clinton Plaza. I know. Oh, Clinton Plaza is another one that would be probably skewing these results. That is low income housing too, and that isn't in that now. Never mind, because Clinton Plaza is on Clinton Street around there. So that wouldn't be included in this. This is where we moved again to the near north side. You can see right on where it says 11. That's right about where we are now. So again, you can see the median household income is $16,964, which is pretty much right at that target poverty line that we just said. That is, and this is literally just on the other side of 690 and 81. So take with that what you will. The median house value is $78,000. So you're looking at, and the median house in 13202 is $225,000. And the median rent is $498 there. And we'll get into rent in just a second. Let me finish with these. The people below the poverty line is 26.6.
How does that reconcile with it? 'Cause that seems low compared to the median income. Certainly when you look at the other chart, go back a chart.
If we go, I don't actually know.
You know, see the 16.9 versus 26. Go back one.
Yes. I'm sorry.
And then what's this? 45 to yeah, 45 versus 46. Does that make sense?
Because, well, I'm sorry, the population's cut off on the top.
Yeah.
So the population of 13202 is 1,346. And then the population of this code is 872. So if the median household, because median, right, is in the middle of the pack. It's not
average.
It's not average.
That's confusing. I would have
Well, I think statistically it means that those that are below the median are far below the median.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's not an even balance. It's
No.
not it's
It's
not
not
an
a
even
bell
farm
curve.
distribution.
Right.
Nice distribution.
Okay, I'm not sure.
And it's skewed because look at the cost of the real estate, it's $225,000. So if you can live there and buy something at $225,000, you are not making $45,000 a year.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that skews it against the other neighborhood.
Right.
Well,
And
it's
then-
suggested there's a very small population there, Jeff, between 20,000 and 45,000, right? Almost everybody under the median is poor.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Because it's only 800.
Right, so there's a small, you know, I don't know how you'd work that out statistically, but between the poverty line and the median, there's very few people.
Right.
And then you got a lot of people who are affording $225,000
Well,
apartments.
yeah, no, so it's like saying half are below the poverty line, and the percentage is 46%.
But half are below 45,000, and 46% are below 20,000. So that means there's very few between 20 and 45.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
And I think, I mean, also, I will say that, like, this data is from citydata.com, which does, I love their maps, and they also have a number of other factors that you can kind of go on, click your own neighborhood and stuff, and I would encourage you to look at that.
And is it based on 2010 census data, or is it
Yeah,
more
it was,
recent? Right.
yeah.
Because when I did mapping of Manlius, all I could get was 2010 census data. So since it's 2016, there have been shifts since 2010.
Definitely.
That's the most recent thing
Yes.
we have.
And that would have been a good
Right.
thing to say at first too. Definitely there have been
Mhm.
shifts since then.
Mhm.
But as the census data is released, it's the most recent. And then you'll also see the age in this. So the age in the last one was 30. The age in this community is 52, which is definitely a shift. But similarly to downtown, this is 83.2% non-family too. So it's a single person within the family. Just a brief word about the rent. $498 is extremely reasonable for rent. It's very difficult to find something that's under $500. I mean, from my experience, it's very difficult to find something that is under $500 for a person to rent unless they already have an existing subsidy or they've been on a waiting list for a particularly subsidized apartment. But for most of our guests that are looking at getting housing, it is extremely difficult to find anything under $500. And if you are a person that's on SSI, so you were disabled before you accumulated however many quarters in your 10 years prior, that have so you don't qualify for SSDI. So if you become disabled before you're 18, particularly for a lot of the folks that we work with that have developmental disabilities or profound mental health issues, you get $808 a month. So when they say you should spend about a third of your income on rent, they're looking at 2/3 of a pretty small income on rent if they're living, again, like most of the people here, in single households. And I think that the other thing to note is that the amount that the county gives a single person for rent, if you are on public assistance, in a rent voucher is $385. And then they give you a little bit more wiggle room if it's an all-included apartment. So it might go up to like $405, $420, somewhere around there. But less than $498. Although that's still a very good rent price in the times that I've searched. I mean, a lot of the folks that we serve that I help look for apartments are kind of resigned to this fact that they're going to have to spend at least $450, $550 if they'd like to find an apartment today. You know what I mean? I always recommend they get on waiting lists at other places, but and then I just have like one little more area, which is the Holly Green neighborhood, which I took as well, because really, again, we're just a couple of blocks away, but you can see how quickly it transitions here, and that's what I like. They had the population of 488, and a household of 369, so only 65% were non-families. It's significantly more black in this neighborhood, 67.6% as opposed to 32.9 in the previous one, and Of course, I didn't write that out. That was really down. Up 26.8% in the first slide. But you see that the household income is higher at $20,556. The house value is higher at $155,000. And the unemployment is a little bit lower at 12%. But I think that you see more families here. Again, like I had said, so you're going to see a younger median age at 26.4, and then the poverty level is about the same at 27.3. The previous slide was 26.6. But this is when you're going to get into more duplexes or more a big house that was changed, kind of chopped up into a lot of apartments. But again, I would say that so much has changed in this neighborhood in the last 6 years. Not 100% sure how it'll still compare, because a lot of investment properties have kind of gone in that right there. I don't know if anybody has any other questions. So, I kind of figured that you had experts who can talk to you about poverty in general. So I was thinking that what I would do today is talk to you a little bit about how our guests describe what their needs are. Because, you don't really need to hear my opinion, although I have to give it to you. But what do our guests need through their eyes and through their voices? This data comes from 2 points. First is a needs assessment that I post every fall. We go out and ask guests what I've been told is a far too long to be effective survey. So I'm working on cutting that down. It's about a 3-page survey that we do in face-to-face interviews with folks. Sometimes I bribe people with cookies. So, but we get demographic information, and then they do an assessment based on what their needs are. Now, the second piece of information that you'll see is more of a support to this, is that we have also hosted, there's an organization called the Homelessness and Housing Coalition, the HHC, which is a division of HUD, so like individual communities will get like HHCs together to kind of manage their HUD grants. So we're a part of that, even though we don't particularly do housing, because we serve people that are both in shelters, homeless, and that are renting and are housing, what we call housing, in danger of being evicted, living in an unfit apartment. So we hosted this year their guests and needs survey. So it was a secondary survey that was actually in 2016. It was in February, I think. It was in the winter, and but I think it was in February of 2016. That we'll have data from that, and I tried to make sure I referenced that at the top of the slide. If I did not, I will let you know which they are, because the graphs look a little different. So we can kind of, I don't want to spend a ton of time on demographics, but this our age is reported. So 8% of folks were in their 20s, 13% in their 30s, 21% in their 40s, 48% in their 50s, and 11% were in their 60s. We didn't actually get anyone under 21 or anyone over 70. But in years past that we had, so you'll see the data trends too for the last couple of years. Now I also use this to present to my board, so I'll have to kind of fact check myself. We also ask, the only thing that we do for guests that are coming in is we kind of take a guess at their age. So if they're under 10 to 17, like almost everybody, 18 to 64, or over 65. So obviously it looks like really skewed data, but that's for our food bank reporting purposes. These numbers do pretty much match up when you kind of split them out. So this is last year's data. 3.46% of our guests are under 10, 1.56 are between 10 and 17, and about 9.6% are seniors. And then we also did gender. Traditionally, soup kitchen clientele is a little bit more male heavy, and that's it's about 13%, I think, on the last Feeding America survey, which was in 2012, I believe. And that would have been a good cross comparison data. But so typically to use more male at soup kitchens, and we see that right in our data. The one on the left is from our needs assessment, which we got a few extra females, and the one on the right is from our daily meal counts, where we marked down gender as well. We had right at that 13%.
Do we know why it's such a big difference?
Typically, women are going to access, excuse me, resources like food pantries first. A lot of that might be because they have the knowledge and the skills. People also then, when you have the benefit of food stamps for a family, so if there are 3 of us in a family, I get more money to leverage for my groceries, right? Because there's three budgets behind me, so you can kind of shop sales, buy bulk a little bit more, do things like that. Whereas typically our male guests are from single-person households, much like we saw in the city data. So they only have $194 to spend. I think another big part of that is at the YMCA, at a lot of these other places, there's not a kitchen, or there's a shared kitchen for a lot of these single-person residences. So when you think about what you would really cook in a shared kitchen, it's probably a microwavable meal. It's really expensive. It's going to cost you like, what, $5 to $6 almost at a corner store in the city. It's going to be harder for folks to get from place to place. I mean, and, you know, it's kind of like whenever you're, you know, maybe you don't have the kids or something like that, you're like, oh, maybe I'll, that's a day that you grab something bite to eat when you don't have like a whole family to kind of cook for. People, I think, are more often single when they come to eat at soup kitchens. But we do see a little bit more, again, than the national average, but just slightly. I don't know if that answers your question.
Do you offer any classes to teach the men how to cook?
We do. We do.
It could be the same percentage in the suburbs.
That's one of our last slides. Part of our expanded programming, we have someone from Cornell Cooperative Extension, someone from the Food Bank of Central New York that does a nutrition class paired with a cooking demonstration to try and break down some of the issues that we've had in the past, or the assumptions or the ideas around cooking and food for some of these folks. So for example, one of our classes was about bean basics. You know, people that maybe never really cooked with beans, that have been raised as meat and potato kind of guys. We can talk about healthy and alternative and much more cost-effective sources of protein. They try out a recipe. They just share their own ideas. They also talk a little bit about exercise in the class. They do the My Plate, Michelle Obama My Plate as well. So they kind of talk about, we did portions. We actually had 2 cooking demonstrations in the past week, one from each of those agencies. We did portion sizes in the one, which was huge. I learned that I am eating way too much cereal, which was a bad lesson for me personally, but a good one for the guests. We've done stuff too in the past that kind of also tries to break down some social stigma stuff. So, for example, when you don't have a lot, you might go to the grocery store and buy actual Frosted Flakes, right? Because for you, that's some kind of status symbol. It's your Nikes, it's your whatever. And there's something undesirable about generic brand cereals. So we actually had a group from Lemoyne a couple years ago come in and make the guests do a taste test between Wegmans brand peanut butter and Jiffy, between Wegmans brand's Honey Nut Cheerios and Honey Nut Cheerios, and Pepperidge Farm bread and Wegmans brand wheat bread. And this is one of the lessons that I'll never forget, because the guests thought the Pepperidge Farm bread, which was $4.50 a loaf, was disgusting. Like, they were grossed out by it. And they said this is generic here. So like some of these other things that have become kind of ingrained in us, right? That like I need that Raisin Bran as opposed to Raisin-O's or whatever the heck we're calling them these days. So kind of to get to get at your budget in multiple ways. We also talk about shopping around the store and doing some other kind of things like that, and trying to teach some of those skills that some of us have gotten within our families, or that some of us have gotten by necessity, which I think that's kind of been another kind of interesting journey. This is are you of Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin? The questions that we ask, and we have this question asked a lot back from the guests, are all based on the census. So they first ask about Hispanic, Spanish, Latino origin, and then their secondary question is race, which is very confusing to pretty much everybody. But only 9% of our total guests are Spanish. And our guests are primarily white. This last year, 69% were white, 20% were black, which I think that's skewed a little bit. I think it's more typically about 30, like you see in the previous 2 years. And then zip code, again, always interesting. Our zip code was extremely high in for 13202. That, I think, is for a couple of reasons. One, the YMCA was literally right next door to us. We have lost a couple of folks that used to come and eat with us from them. But also that was kind of the first year that the Oxford Street Inn had moved from a 13204 to a 13202 zip code. And then you don't see in this data, because I hadn't done this before. Well, so I'm sorry. For the last year, 24% were in 13202, 20% in 13203, 13% in 13204, which is the west side. It's anywhere from the rescue mission all the way back through Tip Hill. And then 15% is 13208. That's going to be more towards the mall, North Court Street kind of area. And then I never pulled this out before, which I should have, but you learn as you go. 9% of the folks we surveyed in 2015 were homeless and living outside. We had a very large homeless population this past summer.
Larger than usual?
Larger than normal.
Yeah,
definitely felt that way. We felt that way, especially according to the data. And it was big. It was really big. And it's already kind of starting to creep back up again. We sit on a couple task force with some of the folks that, again, for this broader HHC committee, we have like an outreach committee, which is me. There's a guy from the rescue mission that does homeless case management. We've gone out a couple times into some of the camps to talk to folks. Met a guy living at the mall that was actually a veteran. John from In My Father's Kitchen is on this committee. So there's a couple of us that kind of trying to filter people into the shelters, and I'm trying to meet some of their other basics.
Is this summer data or winter data?
This is like late summer, early fall data. So that's especially why it's high. But I always do it in that time of year. We do it typically as a welcome to a Jesuit volunteer to get him. It's always a woman, to kind of meet folks. So it's typically pretty consistently late August into October. But this year was especially high. We do take into account the season though, because it does change dramatically. Or at least the visibility of it changes dramatically. I'm not sure if you guys saw in the news, but they do also a point in time count. We call it the pit count. So we pick a very, very cold day in January, and we go around and we drive, and we literally try and find anyone that's homeless and living outside that we can. The Samaritan Center and the Rescue Mission also, because we're the only 2 soup kitchens that operate every day of the year, we also then do what they call a next day survey. So we meet people in the kitchen and say, where'd you spend last night? So it's almost always like the last Wednesday. Which usually means that I can only help out till like 8 or 9, because Peter and I are starting breakfast. I wake up at 3:30 and get to the Samaritan Center by 5 to get some breakfast started. So usually we do much more of the next day stuff. This year we found 7 people at the Samaritan Center the next day, which is our personal high. We'd only ever had like 2 or 3 people before that had stayed outside the night before, and it was cold. It was really cold, and so we had 7, one of whom had slept on our stairs that night. So that was really difficult. He is housed currently, so there's a little bit of wind in there. But a lot of other folks from that particular point in time, the folks that we found at the Samaritan Center, there was a couple that their landlord got angry with them and locked them out, like changed the locks on them, so they had to sleep in a garage. And there was another couple that were staying in abandoned houses, and a couple of folks that were living in other places not suitable for people. So another, now moving off of demographics and talking about employment. 11% of our guests were employed this year, which was up from 9% the year before. 37% are seeking work. 44% identify as retired or disabled. I don't have 2013 data because I actually always just kind of said, are you working or are you not working? I never really thought to ask about being retired or disabled. Again, you learn as you go. So this is, again, from our needs assessment survey. We asked the guests to then identify things that they may be in need of. So 29% of our guests said they needed assistance in seeking work. 56% of those people said they weren't getting any help with that. People that did cite that they were receiving help got it from Samaritan Center, Housing Visions, the Rescue Mission, and Jobs Plus. Jobs Plus is the function of the county, the Department of Social Services, when they send people out to do work experience, they also will go to a Jobs Plus class where they do a resume, get computer time, and are required to go out and complete a particular number of applications per week. Housing Visions actually is doing a really new cool thing. They're doing a much more individual-centered model where they, if say Pete's a participant and he comes in to us, we do a class with him on some just real life skills, and then also do the practical resume stuff. But then we pair him with individualized job coach that can actually stay with him even after he gets employed, and that long-term support, as we see on the next slide, is something that people identify that they really need. And again, 89% of our guests need assistance and said they needed assistance in job training, but 90% of those folks that said they did not receive it. This is from the HHC Gaps and Needs survey. These are supports needed for employment purposes. Most people are identifying transportation. That's 64%. They could check multiple things as supports they needed to maintain to get and maintain employment. 34% said a direct referral to a job. 25% said a job coach. 13% thought they needed more education. 4% thought they needed child care. So, moving off employment and kind of going into other income sources. And again, if this is repetitive from last time, please let me know. So again, I'll go over our 2015 data. I'm sorry. 5% had no income whatsoever. That which this has been a thing that I've got to consider when doing the data. But I also include food stamps as income, even though they're a non-cash benefit and they're not like a liquid benefit where you can like kind of choose. I think it's important to distinguish who has absolutely no income in it. So 5% of our guests had no income at all, which includes having no food stamps. 11% were employed. 38% had SSI or SSD. Excuse me. We had 2% that had a retirement or a pension, 4% that had veteran benefits, 25% that had temporary assistance, 2% that had unemployment, and 4% that had child support. Now, I'd just like to talk for just a second about temporary assistance. So, This is my best experiences with individuals that are single, because that is the majority of our guests. But for a person that is single, so say a single male that's looking for work, he's out of work for whatever reason, applies for temporary assistance. If he applies today and he's homeless, he can get an emergency food stamp benefit. So probably get food stamps within the week, that $189.94 for particularly food only. If from that moment it takes about 45 days for him to be granted his rental assistance and his and any other kind of benefits. At the end of the 45 days, he will get a rent voucher. Now, for that rent voucher, you have to go and get a form filled out by a landlord that's willing to accept your $385 for your PA at their place. You have to get forms filled out. You have to bring them back to PA. Then they will issue a voucher. Now, I don't know if anybody's been on Craigslist lately, but no PA is something that's frequent that they will say on the individual listings. And then if you are doing what the Jobs Plus, when they refer you over to start getting looking for work for these classes, sometimes people are also placed in at work job training sites, like Meals on Wheels is one. Catholic Charities says some folks that are out there. The county office buildings, some folks that clean maybe out there are doing that. You will receive about $22 every 2 weeks in cash benefits. So when people say the word like welfare, like that's something that kind of like grinds my teeth, just because I think that there's a lot more involved with it for the average person than we really think. But that is what welfare is. About $385 in rent, $194 in food, and about $20 every 2 weeks in cash. Which, by the way, is something you'd have to buy your deodorant, your soap, your toilet paper, paper towels, dish soap. All your clothing and shoes needs.
And if you need diapers or feminine hygiene products or anything else like that, medication.
And I think like for a lot of our guests, particularly when you consider like low access jobs that they would be able to get, like at a restaurant, non-skid shoes cost you about $60. We've had churches before come and sponsor, somebody that got a job at a restaurant. Get them these non-skid shoes that I've had a guy that got a job at a restaurant that went into the mall, and he needed particularly black Dickies. Like they were specific about brand of the pants, which I just thought was so bizarre. And then also includes other things like that I wouldn't have ever thought of, like a bike lock for your bike, because a bike's the only source of transportation. A bus pass right now. When I moved here, I took a bus every day. It was $1 when I moved here in 2008. Within 3 years, the price had raised all the way. It went first to $1.25, then to $1.50, and $2 currently. One way. So if I'm at my apartment, I go to the grocery store, $2 one way, $2 back. It's $4 every time you go to the grocery store. So maybe you choose to walk to a local corner store instead, and your food stamp benefits are not going to go nearly as far. And again, just the stick of deodorant comparison. I lived across the street from a corner store, very close to, the Catholic Basilica on Park Ave, right? Harrison Bakery, really, where I lived. But right on that block, there was a corner store across the street from me. A stick of deodorant was $4.25. But if I had a car, so I drove out to Wegmans and I could pick it up at the checkout for $1. But when you have a $194 budget, and even they can buy a deodorant on that, so if you got a $20 every 2 week budget, that's $3 makes a difference. That's a bus ride and a half. So just kind of to frame that a little bit, and that's kind of one of those things that I don't think that people want us to think a lot about. Again, so SSI is about 808. And then also for SSI, something I think you also have to really consider is that if you have a payee, so if you have someone that manages your money and they're a professional, which is something that we recommend. So particularly if you have a developmental disability or a mental health condition, the Department of the Social Security Administration asks you to find someone that'll manage your money. You could get your cousin to do it or something like that. Generally turns out pretty bad. So if a professional does it, you automatically get deducted about $35 a month as like a processing fee for them to help handle your money, to help write rent checks for you, to do all those kind of things. A lot of our folks with, especially with mental health disorders like bipolar and schizophrenia, really need that service. But that's a big chunk when you're only getting $8 or $30.
So, I'm sorry, did you say that was a one-time fee?
No, never mind.
Every month, $35 to this person.
I think that the place that does it is 30 to 35. It could be somewhere in there. You get lost in your own handwriting. These are income amounts. So 31% of our guests have made less than $250. So those would be people that only receive food stamps primarily. That's their only source of income.
Per month?
Per month. Yeah. Almost all my data is like a monthly data because that's really so much of how our guests kind of mind is structured about bill. I mean, really, most of us when you're paying rent, paying your mortgage, paying your National Grid bill, you kind of think in month. So $250 to $499 is about 6%. 36% is $500 to $999. Again, that's where our SSI recipients are going to primarily fall. The next one up, $1,000 to $1,499 a month. That's where a lot of your SSDI people might fall. The people that have had a work history before they became disabled. Maybe we have a lot of guys with like hernias, back problems. We have a guy who actually probably makes a little bit more than this. Is a construction worker that has some kind of sort of dust in his lungs that he's permanently disabled, not able to almost walk around at all from. But worked a really, really high-paying job prior to his disability that unfortunately happened in his 40s. And then very few people, I think our number was in the car that's already gone. 2% were over $2,000. Okay, and housing. So 47% of our guests rent, 14% live in subsidized housing. We had no people that owned their own home this year, but that is something that we do find, people that own their own home. 7% are staying with someone. Now we'll stop there and just say, if you are staying with someone, so if Gina and her 3 kids are living on my couch, but it's under my lease, and they've been doing it now for a year, does not count as homeless. Dina will not receive no services because she does not have a homeless status. So we may be living with my 3 kids, your 3 kids, and extremely tight quarters in a 1-bedroom apartment. You still do not count as homeless. But if I had her staying in my garage, she would. No, just because that would
Should I just tell them I'm staying in the garage?
You should.
I'm staying in the garage.
She should. Because that's a space that's not meant for human habitation.
Right.
But that's when we get into these weird definitions and things like that. We had 11% staying in the shelter, which is a really low number, but you'll also see that 18% were staying outside at the time, because we said this number was really, really large last year. Yeah. But we do find that it's about 30% regularly that are people that are homeless in some way, or living in a shelter, living in an abandoned house. Living in an abandoned house, I would also just count as homeless, because that's under the kind of federal HUD guidelines. But we also find, and this is just something that I find just extremely fascinating, is that these are the number of folks that have lived in a shelter within the last year. So last year was 46%, the year before that was 54%, the year before that was 55%. So these are folks that are under either, are still currently staying in shelter, or within the last year sometimes had to rely on a shelter, were unhoused. So in a lot of ways, they're still really, life is still really precarious for them, for whatever obstacle that brought them to the shelter, whatever obstacle they've overcome to get independent housing. a lot of the folks that meet with us are still pretty vulnerable.
So it's dropping.
Yeah.
Where did they go?
Yeah, why is that dropping?
That's one of them.
Within the last year, I think that that's dropping from our move because I think that there's much more low-income housing up on James Street.
Okay.
And that's why that dropped kind of. I mean, it also looks really significant, but it's 8 percentage points. You know, which you know, with such a transient population, some data is just kind of hard to figure out.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't start at zero.
That's right.
Yeah, this doesn't start at zero.
You should change that scale. Get it to start at 0.
Okay, perfect. That's good. That's very good feedback because I am not very good at PowerPoint. In case you have 7 minutes.
You're hearing from the engineers.
And I appreciate it
Yeah,
because
they're looking for precision.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Well,
It's very helpful.
impact.
Yeah, and
That'll have impact. If you-
Yeah, it's helpful.
yeah, and it's really good feedback. 46% of our guests again, student children in the last year. 44% identified that they needed assistance with permanent housing. 60% of the people that said that they needed that help did not report receiving that help. Now we're also going to go back into HHC data from their.
Just curious about when they say they received no help. How do they how do you ask that question? Did you meet with anyone or?
So yeah, what we typically do is we ask the person, and it kind of depends on where in the survey it is, but we typically say, like, is this something you need help with, yes or no? Is this something you have received help with, yes or no?
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit different for this because we actually do list out, and I pulled some of this because I know that already we're getting a little long, but I pulled some of this stuff out to say, we had also asked specifically, does anybody help you with a rent voucher? Does anybody help you with finding an apartment? Does anybody help you with a security deposit, with furniture, with the process of moving?
So if they said yes to any of that, they wouldn't fall in that 60%. Okay.
Yeah, and then we don't count if your brother helps you move. That's something we didn't count. We counted like an agency, like a community entity, is what we were asking. So this is again what folks were identifying as problems they encountered in their housing search. Primarily not enough income, no security deposit, no transportation. It was 52% on not enough income, 41% said they didn't have they needed help with the security.
Because those two are tied together.
Very
I mean,
much
income and security deposit.
Yeah, very much so. But I think that security deposit, particularly because there, again, everything kind of happens in a month. Like
Right.
you get all your money, like you get $808, there's no possible way, no matter how much you skipped and saved, that you're going to be able to pay a $500 security and $500 rent in a single month. Or unless you become homeless for another month and save that way. Something that has no transportation.
We're stealing money.
To get to the apartments, to look at them, and also to get back and forth from that apartment from the past. It was 24% that responded that they had, or 29% that responded that they had trouble getting an apartment because they had a criminal history. 24% said it was bad credit. 22% identified they needed help in finding a place, someone to help them figure out how to look. When you think about when I think about how I looked for my last apartment, I was on Craigslist every single day. That's not something that is easily accessible to older generations, less computer literate generations, or generations that don't have access to that kind of resource. There's little you find in the paper anymore on that kind of thing, even in like the penny savers and stuff. Some often have a ton of housing. 21% that said that it was hard for them to find housing because they couldn't find another place that accepted their pets. Discrimination was identified by 16%. Finding places that had a lot of code violations was 10%. 5% couldn't find a place with wheelchair access. There's actually a really great piece in on NPR about that. Like 3 months ago, it was really cool because they talked about how we have a lot of duplexes in the city. It's 3 steps up every single time you enter, and a lot of people that were having trouble. The person they interviewed was a gunshot victim, and his mom was really struggling because she couldn't get the city to okay a wheelchair rent. And then 14% that they didn't, so they didn't have any problems at all. And then this also is like supports that they identify that they physically use during their housing search. This is what would help me, he said. 61% said financial support. For 56%, they just had a list of the apartments. And then just to skip ahead real quick, 25% said computer help. A secondary question we asked in the survey, the county government puts out this, maintains this website called New York Housing Search, or nyhousingsearch.gov. And it is really hard to use. It is really hard for me to use, and I grew up with computers. This website is confusing. And it was 21%, only 21% of the responders ever said that they had actually known about or heard of this website and had used it, and 57% said they found it unhelpful. So just to kind of, this is one of our resources that is just in a format that's really difficult. But that's like such low-hanging fruit, right? Like, just redo the website and then maybe we can use it better. Or let someone like me make a printout version of that website in a more easily digestible form for the individual to go search. So that's what one of our ideas is. Transportation and bus passes, it was 46% said that that would help. 23% said they needed help with applications. 15% they said they needed a place that would accommodate their service at home. Which that one makes me really sad. The people couldn't find that.
I know I sent out, in the email I sent everyone, one of the links is to an article from Kenya. But what they're doing is they're doing this social experiment which says they're going to provide every person in the country with a basic income. And that means you get cash. Instead of all, like we talked about with John Yinger, instead of deciding I'll give you this much for that and that much for this, and if you get too much of this, I take some of that away. And they just go, no, we're just going to make sure everybody has a certain minimal level of cash. And then they can decide what to do with it. And they found that when they have done that with people, most of them have used it responsibly. Now, we're always worried if we give people cash, they're going to drink it all or use drugs or, you know, use it unwisely somehow. There's a small, very small percentage that does. But the rest, so they'll have a whole national experiment to say, if you need to save that money for the security deposit, then that's what you do with it. So it makes it much more flexible for people to be able to meet whatever their needs are.
And their needs are always changing, you know, and that's something a little bit more flexible would help. And I think that really kind of goes on to say that, like, I think that one of the things that people really identify that they need help with is they need help with someone helping them how to keep income, finding work, maintaining their eligibility for programs like public assistance and Social Security, making sure they're doing their check-ins and all the other things they've got to do. But they say they identify that they need help with doing that. 43% again said they needed help with transportation. We've already talked about the buses. 38% said they needed help with childcare. 26% said that in order to maintain their housing, they need help with their mental health and substance abuse issues, which is definitely an important part of this, like Tina just said. And then 25% also said they need help budgeting, help figuring out how to do it. I remember when I kind of first started this job, a guy named, his name is Jeff, came to me, and he, I think, has both developmental and mental health issues. And he said, I just don't know how to save for an apartment. Like when I get my, you know, and at the time he was working with a part-time job, he said, what do I do? I'm like, okay, like, we did the envelope system, right? Like I labeled, I said, this is how we split up your check. You put in, you know, you can put in $2 every week for your movie fund. When you get up to, God knows how much a movie costs these days, $10, you can go to the movies. But we literally did an envelope system because he never had a bank account. Another guy I'm working with actually underwent, and I think this is one of the, at least I find one of the most profound issues. He, his name is Chris, and he lost his wallet, which sucks, you know. But he lost his ID in there, and he worked for a local staffing company, and they wouldn't send him out anymore now that he didn't have a photo ID. Well, he also didn't have his birth certificate or his social security card. And he couldn't get into the federal building to get his new social security card because he didn't have a photo ID. And he couldn't get a new photo ID because he couldn't afford the birth certificate because they wouldn't send him out to work anymore. And he spent 1.5 years, and him and his wife ended up homeless because of this. Because he didn't have an ID. And to me, like, that's, I mean, if I were to tell you guys how many times I've lost my wallet, like, I mean, I'm an idiot. But, like, you know what I mean? I don't feel the need to carry my social security card at home if it gets in a lockbox at home, right? But someone who lives in a different neighborhood than I do might feel the need to. And when he lost all these things, finally we helped, like, you know, I took him to the Social Security building, and I had gotten him a non-permanent ID printed from the county, which they actually don't do at all anymore. I think that they stopped doing it right before.
Because of you.
I think they probably did. We brought him in, and but he didn't have a benefits card because he had never had food stamps before. So he didn't have a benefits ID with his picture on it. He didn't. The craziest part about getting his ID is that when you work for some staffing companies, they don't pay you in like direct deposit or even in checks like they would. They give you essentially a fancy gift card that's got no information about you. So you've never had a bank account. He's never had a credit card or a debit card before because he gets this little card, and he can go and put minutes on his phone with a little card, and he can buy groceries with a little card, but it's essentially a gift card that his entire life was on. So I didn't have a proof of address. I didn't have, because he was living outside at this point, I didn't have any sort of photo ID. I didn't have any sort of monetary paper trail from him at all. And then the belongings that they did have were locked in the house because where they had become homeless from, the house was actually condemned during this time, so it was like locked up. It was pretty awful. They have an apartment now too, so I promise they're happy ending most of our story. So I think that both these kind of illustrate employment and income issues and housing issues are some of our big inequalities. I think that they're some of the things that our folks struggle with the most. Very, very, very briefly, I promise. Just a couple words on some of the other issues that they identified. I cut this down a lot. Just things I'm always interested in. People's level of education. 82% of our guests do have their high school diploma or GED, which I think is pretty high. These are some of the other things that people identified that they had this past year. 18% of our guests had some kind of professional certification, 4% had a professional license, so maybe a security officer's license. That number can be up and down because they expire every year and whether or not you have the money to renew them. 18% had some college, 5% had an associate's degree, 7% had a bachelor's. We didn't have anybody with a master's degree this year, but we did have 2% of our guests who had a doctoral degree.
This is interesting.
Wow.
This last
Very
week we heard the biggest correlator, right, to poverty was education. This doesn't support that.
Right, and that might have been nationally, but not
Right,
necessarily
right.
who goes to
Right,
the
no,
Samaritan
it's just
Center. Yeah.
Well, and also, I mean, I think that there's also going to be some stuff like you could have a professional like certification and not have a GED. You know, you could have done lead safety training or forklift certification. I mean, it's really kind of concrete.
You could have a bachelor's degree in mental health issues.
Well,
And
but turn it around. If 18% have some college, 82% have
Sure.
no
Have
college.
no college,
Yeah.
right?
Right, that's still correlates.
Right.
Sure. Um, 24% of our guests reported that they still needed assistance with their other educational goals, going back to school. Folks that didn't have their GED. 85% of our guests said that they had not received help with that. They had not gone to a GED prep class. So they had not been able to find a way to get back to college. And a lot of our guests also may have started with Brian Stratton or something like that, some of those for-profit colleges. So we can kind of get a little controversial. Healthcare status, you can see this number is down. We only had 9% uninsured this year, so that was a big change, which is great. The pending number is kind of the one that's up, so they're also in the process. And that 45-day wait period that we talked about, again, because so much of our particular population is always in transition, because that's why they come and meet with us then. And then we had 83% that were currently insured. If you're interested in how they've got it, Medicaid, Medicare, VA health care, 4% of private insurance. The big gap, though, is that 35% do not have a primary care doctor, which is bad. So, trying to get people hooked into long-term sustainable health solutions through PCP, where, because we always hear too about the expense of using, especially if you're living without insurance for so long, a lot of these folks might use the emergency room or prompt care as their primary care doctor, which is bad for both their health, for the economy, and for the costs associated with that, for sure. Only 28% of our guests said they needed some kind of help, assistance with healthcare. Now that is also help navigating healthcare insurance in some way. You pick, on Medicaid, typically you're picking a managed care, so sometimes that can be a difficult thing to navigate because you have total care, United Healthcare, and the one that I always forget, Fidelis. So those are kind of their choices at this current moment in Onondaga County, but there have been a number of others through the years. And each of them have very different things, ways that you navigate. For example, United Healthcare, you can never go to a specialist without talking to your PCP first, which is a little hard considering a few of our guests even talk to their PCP, right? Or have one. With some other ones, they also offer the best range of actual prescription and don't ask you to go to generic. So it can obviously be a trade-off that I think we can do a little bit more with educating folks about their choice.
Do you have a feel for what percentage of the participants have substance abuse issues?
I think that they identified it for it a little bit later on. I think it was about, I'm trying to remember if I did that one out of here. 30%? 24? I mean, it was lower than you think. I think we also do serve a lot of folks that had substance abuse issues in the past in some way. Or of like a coexisting kind of issue, they've self-medicated for their mental health issues for a number of years. But I think that, there's only, what does that mean, right? 25% say they identify as that they have issues with substance abuse. It also means there's probably a certain percentage of folks that aren't ready to face their substance abuse issues. Right. So I would imagine that's a low number. Right. My guess would be about 35. Now, interesting thing from the data from this fall, I thought that we would be like through the roof, right, in the middle of this heroin epidemic that we know so well, and we're about steady with the number of folks. I think that we do have heroin users, and we do have people that are using Spike, the other big street drug that we're hearing a lot about. I also think we're a little, but I do think that there's also a number of people that have kind of been through this, that are in recovery, that'll still eat with us, that no longer identify as needing help with substance abuse issues because they've kind of been through it or not. They will still go to their AA or NA, but they don't require treatment per se. And I also would say at the Samaritan Center, we are very, very strict about that kind of thing. When someone comes that, it's known really well. We actually heard just as recently as Friday, like, I can't believe that this person's here and kind of like together, and I think that people respect the place. I think part of it's because it's been in a church, both in St. Paul's before and now in St. John the Evangelist. I think we don't get as much, not that we don't get drug users, but we don't get drug use on our property at all. Well, some guy that shows up drunk once in a while, but it's much more rare, I think, with other sort of things. So it also, in my opinion, could be skewed for that.
So what's the policy for that if someone shows up?
Get them a meal to go. Get them a couple sandwiches and ask them to leave.
Okay.
And have a strong talking to them next time you see them.
What's that?
Have a strong maternal talking to next time you see them.
How accurate do you think the self-reporting is, though? Because you're asking them,
Sure.
are you using drugs? Do you sense
The way that we word it too is, do you need help with your addiction issues? That's why I do think the number's gonna be low. You know what I mean? Because before someone's willing to accept the fact that they need help with a substance abuse issue, no, I'm good. I only have one beer a day, you know, or whatever your justification or framing might be. But we're also very firmly of the belief that the Samaritan Center is a place that feeds the hungry, a place that welcomes people that may not feel welcome. So we need to first and foremost be hospitaliers. Hospitable. My goodness.
I like your word better.
Yeah, hospitalers. Yeah. Okay. So we could actually enter if you'd like to. Just again talking about personal care items. 74% of our guests said that was something that they would. So I'm so sorry, I kind of ran away.
No.
Oh, I have one last statistic. That's my last one on my slide. So can I just skip to that real quick? So we also ask a lot of data that I would like the engineers in the room to just like cover your ears for a second. Because we do some open-ended questions, which any surveyor hates. But my most favorite, we ask about places that people find support and care in their lives. So some of our questions are like, you know, how safe do you feel in your environment? How much power do you just kind of feel like you have? Like really hard measurable stuff. Not obviously a lot of it depends on what the person's going through at that very moment in time. But I always find it really interesting. People feel really optimistic about their future and feel really poorly about their role within a community. And that's something that kind of breaks my heart. But one of the other questions that we ask them is just, who in your life offers you the most support and care? Fill in the blank. And you get a lot of my mother, my father, my priest, my cousins, my friends, but 13% of our guests, just with who in your life offers you the most support and care, say the Samaritan Center. I think that makes us a really special place.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Tremendously informative.
Are we going to get to post this one too?
Yes, yes, and you can thank Deirdre for doing the